Many times over the last months, maybe even years, the question's been asked, where are we? What is it that's present? Who are we? When the three levels of existence or mind, the nitty-gritty level of cause and effect, the level of spirit, intuition, dreams, and the level of undifferentiated interrelatedness come together in a state of what is called Satchitananda and is then transcended. There was a very, very rich merchant, and he had 3 sons. The first son was called Hamid, and the second son was called Hamid, and the third son was called Hamid. Now the merchant was on his deathbed, and he called his 3 sons to him, and he said, Hamid will inherit, Hamid will inherit, and Hamid will not inherit. And then he passed away. For 7 days, the sons mourned their father's death, and for 7 days they fulfilled the obligations that were required by their faith. But after this they came together to discuss who it could be who would not inherit. And so they decided that the best thing that they could do would be to go to a famous judge who was renowned for his wisdom and allow him to have them find out who it was who was to not inherit. So they set out on their road to the judge's house. But on the way it was hot and the sun was beating down on them, so they decided to rest by the side of the road. And as they rested by the side of the road, the first son said, "Oh, a camel has been lying here who has no tail." And the second son said, "Yes, and it only had 1 eye." And the third son said, "And yes, it was carrying something sweet and something fatty on its back." So after they'd rested, they went further down the road, and they met a man that was obviously a camelteer, because he was carrying a camel whip in his hand. And the man accosted the young men and asked them, "Have you seen my camel?" And the first son said, "Did it have no tail?" "Yes," said the camelteer. "And was it blind in 1 eye?" said the second son. "Yes," said the camelteer. "And was it carrying something sweet and something fatty on it?" "Yes," said the camelteer. "It had a sack of ghee on one side and some date juice on the other." "No, we haven't seen it," said the 3 sons. The camelteer said, "That's not true. How could you know these things about my camel if you didn't steal it? We better go to the judge and let him." "Oh," said the 3 young men, "we were on our way to the judge to ask him a question anyway, so we'll ask him about this also." So they arrived at the judge's house and were taken in. And of course, the camelteer, who was very angry about losing his camel, stated his case to the judge. And so the judge said, he said to the first young man, how did you know that this camel had no tail if you didn't steal it? And the young man said, well, we know that if a camel is lying down, when its tail is waving, the grass would be flat where it was laying. And the grass was flat, and so indicating that he had no tail. And the second son, and how did you know that it only had one eye? And the young man said, well, I observed that the grass on one side was eaten down, but the grass on the other was not, and the grass was equally as lush, which would indicate that the camel only had one eye. And to the third, the judge said, how did you know? And the young man said, well, there are a number of ants on one side, which indicated that there was something sweet, and on the other there were lots of flies blowing, which would indicate, because flies like something fatty. And so the judge, weighing this up, turned to the camelteer and said, go, and may God grant you the wish to find your camel. These 3 young men have extraordinary abilities of perception, and it is clear that they did not steal your camel. So the camelteer went off, and the judge said to the young man, well, stay and be my guest for the evening, and we'll tackle your problem in the morning. So a repast was prepared for the young men, and they were left to eat their dinner on their own, and the judge hid behind a screen to listen to the conversations that took place between them. And the first son commented, this is not a lamb stew, this is made of dog meat and is inedible. And the second son said, this food has been prepared by a woman who is in her days of menstruation. And the third son said, our host is a bastard. He has been conceived out of wedlock. The other brother said, don't speak like that about our host. But the judge, hidden behind the screen, noted what all had said. First of all, he went into the kitchen and confronted the cook. How dare you serve dog meat to our guests? And the cook was affronted and said, no, let's go to the shepherd. And when the shepherd was called, he said, oh, it was a lamb, but this lamb, because its mother, the ewe, died, it was suckled by a bitch. And so the judge pondered for a while, and then he went up to the chamber of his mother, and he put a knife at her throat and said, tell me, who is my father? And the mother confessed, in fear of her life, that a peddler had come by, and she had erred from the path of faithfulness to her husband, and grown large with this son. Again, he asked the cook, was she in her days of menstruation? And she said, yes. The next morning, when all the 3 young men were called together, the judge asked them, what is this problem that you want to be solved? And they explained that they were all 3 Hamids, and the 2 were to inherit, and the other was not. So the judge looked at the first brother and said, how did you know that this was an animal, not that you thought it was? And the first son said, it was because the sinews of its legs were tight and taut and lean, not like those of a lamb. And he turned to the second son and said, how did you know that the person who cooked this food was in her days of menstruation? And the second son said, it is well known that a woman at this time does not know the difference between salty and sweet. The food had no salt. The judge pondered for a moment, and then he turned to the third son, and he said, it is you who will not inherit your father's wealth. It goes to those who were bred of his loins, because it is well known that a bastard will only recognize another bastard. What does this connote for us? What does it tell us? How does it help us to answer the question, where are we? What is it that's present? Who are we when we transcend the 3 levels of existence that have come together in the moments of life as perception and are transcended? We know that saying well. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And it said, if you were not yourself a Buddha, how would you recognize the Buddha to enable you to kill him? Where are we? What is it that's present? Who are we? When the 3 levels of life merge in the moments and are transcended. What's present in your life now, in the moments? What is it that's seamless in your awareness? What is perception for you now? Thank you.